Hello, everyone. So today we're going to be talking about the illegalization of cannabis for communities of color with the UCLA Public Health Scholars Training Program. Hello, my name is Tomás Mejorado, and these are my partners.
I'm Wumi Obilowa.
And I'm Christia Tungana.
So first, we're going to start off by defining cannabis. Cannabis refers to a group of 3 plants with psychoactive properties known as cannabis sativa, cannabis indica, and cannabis ruderalis. It has been referred to by many names such as pot, marijuana, and weed, but in recent times, it's been called cannabis because that is the scientific terminology. And in recent times, people are trying to move away from the usage of other terminologies that are more associated with the criminalization of the drug. The most well-known components of the cannabis plants are cannabinoid, CBD, which isn't intoxicating and provides more of a relaxing feeling, while tetrahydrocannabinol, THC, provides more of the high that's associated with cannabis. The earliest use of cannabis were for medical purposes rather than recreational ones. The early Chinese surgeon Hu Tao is credited with being the first recorded person to use cannabis as an anesthetic. This was also the case in countries like India, the Netherlands, and Egypt. In the United States at the turn of the 20th century, cannabis was generally used for medical rather than recreational purposes as well. After the Mexican Revolution of 1910, Mexican immigrants flooded into the United States, introducing to American culture the recreational use of marijuana. Because of this introduction, the drug became associated with immigrants, and the fear and prejudice about the Spanish-speaking newcomers became associated with marijuana. Throughout the 19th century, the government found ways to pass harsh laws and policies to regulate the use and production of the drug. For example, during the 1980s, the Anti-Drug Abuse Act stated that the possession of 100 marijuana plants received the same penalty as the possession of 100 grams of heroin. From these facts, it's obvious that cannabis legalization in the United States has been rooted in anti-immigrant and racist sentiments. Additionally, the government's need for control and power is evident in the ways in which they continue to weaponize cannabis legalization against communities of color. This is a public health issue, especially for communities of color, because it negatively impacts them economically, socially, and culturally. For example, it increases their contact with the police, which also increases their presence in prisons and jails. It also negatively impacts their socioeconomic status and those of their families.
And so cannabis really became criminalized due to these 3 acts: the marijuana tax, the BOGs, and the Narcotics Control Act. And because of this, it relates to how marijuana to this day is still being criminalized, which is deeply impacting our communities of color. But as of today, though, there are 18 states that have made the recreational and medicinal use of marijuana legal. But on a federal level, we're still seeing that marijuana is illegal. And part of that is because of the scheduling classification of cannabis. Because it's a Schedule I drug, it makes it difficult for medical research to be done on the drug. And with medical research, it could help decriminalize the drug and really amplify and emphasize many of the medicinal purposes that can be helpful to our society and communities.
In regards to economic repercussions, the US incarcerates more of its people than any other nation. The United States is spending around $70 billion yearly on jails, prisons, and detention centers. Instead, this large amount of money could be allocated to community programs in efforts to uplift communities impacted the most by incarceration.
They're also seeing that children with incarcerated parents experience more economic instability, and with economic instability, it causes for housing insecurity, food insecurity. It may even impact one's education, all of these different factors that really determines one's health and well-being. And as I mentioned before, in many states where cannabis is legal, there's a booming cannabis industry that's making multi-millions, billions of dollars, but we're finding that 80 to 90% of these businesses are owned by white individuals. And once again, it speaks to blocking Black and brown people from having economic access or creating wealth for themselves while they're dealing with all of the negative implications of marijuana, while their white counterparts are not. And on top of dealing with the implications of marijuana, if you have a criminal record, it makes it really difficult in finding employment. Once again, finding employment, it's hard to have housing security, you don't have food security, and you have all of these exacerbating problems that once again impact your health. And because of that, that can really increase an individual's rate of recidivism. They may go back to engaging in past criminal activities just because of the lack of employment opportunities.
Some health repercussions include children with incarcerated parents are more likely to suffer from physical and mental health problems. Because of the classification of a Schedule I drug, it inhibits researchers from studying the effects of medical and medicinal properties of cannabis. Without proper federal regulations, people could be exposed to cannabis products that are laced with other dangerous substances, such as fentanyl or spice. Being incarcerated exacerbates negative health outcomes such as increased depression, anxiety, and greater exposure to infectious diseases. If we look down at the bottom left, children with incarcerated parents are more likely to suffer from physical and mental health problems. So this is what the graph shows us.
And as for the social and cultural repercussions, we see that Black and brown individuals use cannabis at similar rates as their white counterparts, yet there's a disproportionate number of Black and brown people incarcerated compared to white people. On the graph on the far in the bottom right, we see that the ratio between Black and white people arrested for marijuana possession, Black people are more than 3 times more likely to be arrested. And because of that, it ties negative stereotypes against Black and brown people in the head of many people in society. Once again, it dehumanizes and it kind of vilifies Black and brown individuals. And then there's also the stigma of being incarcerated. There's all these stereotypes that people are violent or they're just dangerous without really looking at the context in which the individual grew up in, and how if you're surrounded or exposed to a certain environment, you may engage in those things, and that's something that's out of your control. And in addition to that, when someone becomes incarcerated, it's not just them who's impacted, their network of family and friends are also negatively impacted. There's correlations between there's correlations in between with their kids dealing with drug use or dealing with other health implications, whether it's depression or anxiety. Once again, there's destabilization within the household because you're removing an important parental figure in the home.
So one of the proposed solutions to these issues that we just talked about has been federal cannabis legalization. This image at the bottom for the left corner shows that federal cannabis legalization can facilitate job creation while also significantly increasing tax revenue. And Congress should consider how to equitably maximize these economic benefits. It's also important that if federal legalization of cannabis does go into effect, it's also important that Congress supports, trains, and licenses Black entrepreneurs in order to ensure that these jobs in the industry are not being filled by the same people who continue to control the industry, but are instead filled by people of color and create some kind of diversity within the industry. This is important also because it gives Black people and brown people an avenue through which they can make money and profit off the income that's the sales that are being generated from cannabis. And some of the health benefits, some of the health implications of federal legalization has been that cannabis can be used as a pain reliever as opposed to opioids, for example, especially since the United States has seen an increase in opioid use amongst the population. Additionally, doctors are at the moment barred from studying the components of cannabis, and they're also limited in the amount of cannabis that they can have in their labs because just because of how criminalized the drug is. And if it does become federally legalized, it would allow researchers and doctors to do more research on the drug, to sort of expand the public's knowledge on the benefits and dangers of the drug. Some of the social and cultural benefits of legalization are that it would means that it would be removed from the controlled substance schedule, which would reduce the number of people involved in the criminal justice system, especially Black and Latino Americans who are constantly targeted by these racist policies. This would also mean that the government would have to expunge the criminal record of those who have been previously incarcerated for cannabis and grant those of them who need currency the opportunity to get one. There have been some implications and drawbacks to the possibility of federal legalization. Some studies have found that by federally legalizing marijuana, we also see an increase in the amount of young adults who would be engaging in drug use, engaging in the use of the drug. They also argue that expanding the drug commerce would lead to more violent underground markets, and would maybe lead to more smuggling of the substance across borders. And what can be said for this is that despite these possible consequences of federal legalization, communities of color may finally get the chance to experience the sides of the presence of cannabis in the US that isn't weaponized against them, or not as weaponized against them as it usually is, but instead promotes inclusion, equity, and equality. Thank you so much for listening to our presentation. These are references. Thank you.